Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. I mean, these are three of the most terrifying villains in all of movie history. But what if I told you they were all inspired by one guy, and not some fictional character, but a quiet, kind of unassuming handyman from the tiny town of Plainfield, Wisconsin? So today, we're going to dig into the deeply disturbing true story of Ed Gein, the real man behind the monsters.
So it all kicks off, as these stories so often do, with a missing person. A 58-year-old hardware store owner named Bernice Warden just vanishes. And who was the last person to see her? A local guy, Ed Gein. He'd stopped by to buy a gallon of antifreeze. So when police showed up at his dark, run-down farm, they really had no idea they were about to walk straight into a real-life house of horrors. What they found inside, it was beyond anyone's worst nightmare. Yeah, Bernice Warden's body was there, but that was just the start of it. The house was this grotesque museum of human remains. We're talking bowls made from skulls, chairs upholstered with skin, even a lampshade made from a human face. The scene was so unbelievable, so gruesome, that it left even the most seasoned investigators completely traumatized. This discovery sent shockwaves across the country, and everybody was asking the same question. How? How could a human being possibly do something like this? To even try to understand the answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, to Ed Gein's incredibly isolated and frankly toxic childhood. Ed grew up on this super remote farm with a violent, alcoholic father and an extremely controlling, fanatically religious mother named Augusta. She was constantly preaching about how evil and sinful the world was, especially women. She drilled it into her two sons, Henry and Ed, that they were to have no friends, ever. Augusta's influence was, well, it was everything. She was the only person Ed was ever close to, and it created this deeply warped, totally dependent relationship. Anytime Ed even tried to make a friend, he was punished for it. His entire emotional universe was just this one person, a fact that was going to have some absolutely devastating consequences. And then, in the span of just 5 years, that whole universe just completely collapsed. First, his dad died. Then his brother Henry died during a brush fire. And here's a weird detail. Henry was found with unexplained bruises on his head, but police just kind of brushed it off at the time. A year later, Augusta died. At 39 years old, Ed Gein was completely, utterly alone in the world. Left all by himself on that isolated farm, Gein's mind really started to unravel. He sealed off his mother's rooms, keeping them perfectly preserved, almost like a tomb. Meanwhile, the rest of the house just descended into total chaos and filth. Gein became obsessed with anatomy books and these pulp magazines filled with stories of Nazi atrocities and cannibals. And this is where Gein's horrifying hobbies began. You see, his collection of human remains wasn't the result of a long killing spree, which is what a lot of people think. It was actually the product of two distinct and equally disturbing criminal activities. Gein himself confessed that most of the body parts came from grave robbing. He would sneak into local cemeteries at night, digging up the bodies of recently buried women who, in his twisted mind, looked like his late mother. But he was also a murderer. He was confirmed to have killed at least 2 women, Bernice Warden in 1957, and another local woman, a tavern owner named Mary Hogan, back in 1954. Get this. He told investigators he made as many as 30 of these nighttime trips to local graveyards. And his ultimate goal? It's almost too disturbing to even say out loud. He wanted to collect enough skin to create a woman's suit so that he could, in his own words, crawl into her skin and literally become his mother. And, while he only confessed to 2 murders, Gein was always the prime suspect in several other unsolved disappearances in that area, including 2 young girls. His involvement was never proven, but it just leaves this huge, chilling question mark over the true extent of his crimes. So, with the horrifying truth of the farmhouse out in the open, and all these suspicions of other crimes swirling around, the world was left wondering, what do you do with a man like Ed Gein? How does the justice system even begin to handle something like this? Well, Gein's legal path was a long and complicated one. At first, he was found mentally unfit to stand trial at all, so he was sent to a state hospital. A full decade later, in 1968, doctors decided he was now competent enough. So he had a trial, was quickly found guilty of murder. But, and here's the big twist, because he was deemed insane at the time of the crime, he was sent right back to a mental institution, and that's where he stayed for the rest of his life. And what about the house itself, that infamous house of horrors?
It never became some morbid tourist trap. Just before it could be auctioned off, it burned to the ground in a fire that everyone pretty much agrees was arson. The locals just wanted to erase the stain from their town. His car, on the other hand, was sold to a carnival operator and put on display as Ed Gein's Ghoul car. Yeah. Gein himself died of respiratory failure in 1984. He was buried in a quiet cemetery in Plainfield, right next to the very mother he was so obsessed with. But even in death, his story wasn't over. His tombstone became a target for souvenir hunters and vandals, a weird symbol of his lasting notoriety. Okay, so this brings us to the final and maybe the most unsettling part of the whole story. How did the crimes of one disturbed man in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, create an entire archetype that would forever change horror and popular culture? Why did his specific brand of madness resonate so deeply with people? The connection is just shockingly direct. The mother-obsessed Norman Bates from Psycho? That's Gein. The killer wearing a mask of human skin? Leatherface? That's Gein. The murderer trying to craft a woman's suit? Buffalo Bill and the Silence of the Lambs? That's Gein too. His real-life atrocities didn't just inspire horror. They literally gave them the blueprint for some of the genre's biggest monsters. You know, there's this famous quote from the book American Psycho that people always misattribute to Ed Gein. Let me be clear, he never actually said this. But the fact that people think he did, that it sounds like something he would say, that tells you everything you need to know about how deeply his specific, terrifying psychology has been absorbed into our culture. Ultimately, the story of Ed Gein forces us to confront a really chilling truth. The most terrifying monsters aren't always hiding in fictional shadows. Sometimes they're in the quiet houses right next door. He completely blurred the line between reality and the darkest horror you can imagine, creating a monster archetype that still fascinates and scares us. And it leaves us with one final thought. Why are we still so captivated by the darkness he represents?